You've seen his goals, you've cheered his highlights, but have you ever heard the full story, told slowly, from small streets in Rosario to silver skies at the World Cup? This is not a rush of speed or noise, but a path you can follow with your eyes closed. Settle in and let me show you how Messi became more than a player, how he became the lasting measure of the game itself. Picture the faint light of evening spilling across a narrow street in Rosario. The houses sit close to one another, their walls faintly cracked from years of heat and rain. The voices of neighbors drift out of open windows, while a stray dog pads lazily through the dusk. At the center of this quiet corner, a small boy kicks a worn football, its patches frayed and scuffed. He does not notice the peeling paint on the walls or the rattling noises of passing cars. For him, the street is a stadium, the cracked pavement a field, and the ball in his feet a whole world. The boy's name is Lionel, but nobody on that street could know that the tender sound of that name would one day echo across stadiums worldwide. What you notice first, though, is his frame. He is smaller than the other children, even though he plays with boys much older. His steps are short, his movements tight, but when the ball rests at his feet, something changes. His balance steadies, his shoulders settle, his eyes sharpen. It is as if the ball understands him in return. Imagine watching from across the street as he performs little turns, toe touches, bursts down a stretch of cracked sidewalk. The ball never strays far, it clings to him almost loyally. With each dribble, his body seems to tell a story. Thin legs carrying more energy than seems possible, slight shoulders holding dreams too wide for anyone to measure. He plays until the street grows dim, and only when the lights on the homes flicker awake do his parents call him back inside. Inside the house, his family share meals, warmth, and love. The life is not easy. His father carries long hours on his shoulders. His mother balances the care of the home. The needs are many, while resources stretch thin. For them, joy is found in small ways: the laughter of their children, the scent of food cooking, and that moment each evening when their youngest son returns after playing, his cheeks flushed, shirt damp, but eyes glowing with satisfaction. It is not a loud joy, but a quiet one. The neighbors whisper about him. They notice his skill, the ease with which he keeps the ball at his feet, the way he squeezes through gaps bigger kids cannot close. Still, those whispers are mixed with the quiet weight of doubt. Too small, some say. How will he manage when he grows? Others tilt their heads in concern at how slow his body is to catch up with his talent. They wonder if his frame will bind him, if it will pin his wings before they even open. And yet, on the street, none of that matters. You can picture him playing against taller kids with a grin that refuses to shrink away. The ball is his answer. With every feint, every step past a defender, it is as though he speaks in a language no obstacle can silence. He finds happiness in every movement, and though his size sets him apart, you notice something much stronger beneath the surface: his will. He trains wherever he can. A field, a square, a rough corner of concrete. It does not matter. To him, every space is a pitch waiting to be claimed. You imagine him rising early at times, when the neighborhood is still quiet, using those moments to chase his dream while the world lingers in sleep. At other times, he joins others for games that stretch long into the night. Losing means nothing. Winning means little more. What he chases instead is the feeling of improvement, the control of the ball tighter tonight than it was the night before. But reality lingers, just as the day eventually meets night. His family feels the push and pull of possibility against hardship. Supporting his play is not always easy. Shoes grow too small, equipment costs weigh heavy, and medical visits start to bring new worries. The boy, so full of fire when dribbling under street lamps, must also sit in quiet rooms hearing words about his growth and body that hint at barriers. His parents comfort him, but inside they feel their own quiet fear. Dreams are fragile when set against such challenges. For Messi, small Lionel, the boy with the ball, these doubts land like shadows, but he refuses to slow. If anything, he plays with even more hunger. Each concern, each whisper, fuels his spirit rather than diminishes it. He does not speak much of it. He never needed to. His actions on the field are his response. In that way, he begins learning something few children ever face at that age: that the world can doubt you, that life can challenge you, but the ball at your feet remains honest. It never questions, it only listens. Picture him once more on that same street, the soft light of dusk fading, as he weaves around invisible defenders, aiming for goals marked only by scraps of stone. His siblings and friends clap, though not always sure why they feel such awe watching a boy so small strike a ball so clean. His joy, the joy of simply playing, becomes a shield protecting him from whispers of doubt. Still, the limits of his body grow harder to ignore as time passes. He notices taller boys shooting past him in growth, and the gap appears wider with each passing season. The ball remains faithful, yet every coach who looks at him sees the same question. Will his size keep him from lasting long in the game he loves? Such moments sting, though he hides the feeling. Behind his eyes, however, a quiet truth builds, a determination that never leaves. What rises inside him is not loud, not expressed with boasts or words. It shows instead in his persistence. When he falls, he rises faster. When bigger kids crowd him, he slips through with even cleaner touches. Each move teaches him that talent alone will not grant him a path. Effort will, resilience will, and a patience too deep for his years will. Slowly, he begins embodying the lesson that greatness can look fragile, yet still grow strong. The streets of Rosario remain his ground, his school, his proving place. On the outside, he appears as just another child weaving through cracked alleys with a ball that has lost much of its shine. But if you stand close enough, and you listen to the rhythm of his play, you hear something else. You hear the pulse of destiny gathering in small motions. You hear the steady drum of greatness building, not from wealth or stature or privilege, but from sheer love. In time, the boy's football leads him beyond his corner, into organized games that attract more eyes. Scouts begin to note his talent, though always in the same breath with questions of his size. His family struggles with whether to push him into opportunities or to shelter him from possible disappointment. They know the difficulty of the road, but they also see how lifeless he seems in any place except the pitch. Their love for him outweighs their fear, and they continue to give what little they can for his dream to survive. Every touch in those early years carried layers. The innocence of play, the weight of survival, the echo of dreams too vast to measure. Step by step, you sense a story forming, one where the simplest street in Rosario shapes a boy into the keeper of a lifelong pursuit. From pavement games to whispers about his small body, from quiet dinners with his family to nights hidden in practice, every moment becomes part of a beginning that no one else could see fully at the time. And so, from those cracked streets emerges a truth. Greatness need not shout. It grows in silence. It grows in shadows and small motions, drawing strength not from what is given, but from what is refused to be surrendered. Lionel Messi, still only a boy, still frail by many standards, carried this truth within each step and every breath. The next part of his journey would reveal another battle entirely, not one against opponents on a field, but a hidden challenge inside his own body, one that threatened to turn those whispers of doubt into reality, and tested whether his hunger for football could withstand the weight of biology itself. Imagine having the ball at your feet, every touch light and quick, every movement full of joy, but knowing inside that your own body seems to hold you back. That was the silent truth of Messi's young life when doctors told him something his heart already feared. He had a growth hormone deficiency. For a child whose happiness lived on the pitch, it was like carrying a burden no one else could see. His legs were shorter than most, his frame slight, his energy sometimes scattered, and yet his dream stretched far beyond the narrow streets of Rosario. The words, "too small," became chains he had to drag behind him. It was not just a physical challenge, but one wrapped in cost. The treatment he needed was expensive, more expensive than a modest family could ever easily provide. Imagine working long hours as his father did, or balancing the household as his mother did, then facing the knowledge that each injection cost more than food on the table. For them, the dream was real and the love was strong, but the obstacles pressed close. Still, to Messi, only football mattered. Every time he placed the ball in front of him, it dulled the edge of doubt. On those evenings, his body's weakness became invisible. You would see him dribbling for hours, a small boy with determination carved into his steps, his control sharper each night, his vision wider. But deep inside, he also knew, if help did not come, those whispers of doubt might one day drown the sound of the game he loved. Every training session became more than just practice. When taller kids laughed or brushed by him without effort, Messi showed his quiet rebuke by growing sharper with the ball. Coaches sometimes dismissed him, some seeing his talent but doubting whether it could survive the physical demands. They looked beyond his touch, his balance, his vision, and only saw the frame of a child too slight. For Messi, that disbelief was like an echo, chasing him into every match, every move. Yet his response was not anger, it was patience. Football was the language he trusted, and with it he answered questions without words. Think of the field as a stage, where his body's limits were on display, yet his spirit ran free. If his legs felt heavy, his feet moved lighter. If his body tired, his mind worked quicker. He learned early to protect the ball not with muscle, but with angles, with speed, with anticipation. Watching him, you could see a playing style shape itself not through privilege, but through necessity. Every move designed to outthink bigger opponents, every touch carrying the urgency of survival. In that sense, the deficiency that haunted him also sharpened him. It forced him to sculpt a style that was less about power and more about precision, less about force and more about grace. Meanwhile, his family felt the weight like a shadow across the kitchen table. Nights were spent talking not about whether he loved football, everyone knew that, but whether the treatments could continue. Bills grew, jobs stretched, and even with sacrifices, the path looked narrow. Clubs who noticed his ability often hesitated when they heard about his condition. To sign a small boy like Messi meant not just faith in his skill, but faith enough to invest in his medical care. For most, it seemed too great a risk, and yet, every no fueled his inner fire. Every time someone doubted, every time someone measured his height instead of his heart, Messi tightened his hold on the ball and refused to let go. He may have left the pitch with bruises, with lungs burning quicker than others, but he always returned. That stubbornness, that refusal to stop, became his trademark, long before the world called him the GOAT. Imagine being 12 years old and carrying layers of pressure no child should. Not just to win matches, but to prove day after day that his size did not define him. Imagine hearing coaches speak of players who had the right bodies, and knowing your own strength lay somewhere deeper, somewhere harder to see. It could have crushed him, it almost did. But instead it carved resilience into the way he played. Small as he was, his will ran taller than everyone around him. Training for him was not only about ball control or passing drills, it was also about ignoring sore legs, hiding aches, and pretending that he wasn't tired when he was. He had to carry the invisible seconds of strain, but he never made excuses. Coaches noticed how, despite his frame, he showed up ready, eager, quiet but unwavering. Fellow youngsters may have taken breaks. Messi rarely did. For him, every touch of the ball was not routine. It was resistance. It was proof that nothing was going to steal the game from him. Even in the face of doctors' reminders and financial limits, he returned again and again to the pitch. His friends may have played for fun. Messi played for air. To stop would mean more than just ending a game. It would mean losing his balance in life. Watching him on the street or on the field, you would never guess the hidden sickness, because when the ball settled at his feet, the illness seemed like a myth. He erased it with every dribble. Clubs watched and hesitated. Some saw a miracle of skill, others saw a liability. One by one, opportunities seemed to shrink back. The family worried, neighbors empathized, But Messi simply played on. Never much for words even then. His statement was his persistence. He made the pitch his canvas, showing, silently, that greatness was not housed in the size of a body, but in the will of a soul. He would not shrink, not in spirit, not in purpose. Think of it like a small candle burning in a storm. The wind presses in, the rain strikes, but somehow the flame refuses to die. It may flicker, it may weaken, but it survives. That was Messi during those years. He was the flame, thin against the elements, but unwilling to vanish. His heart for football proved far larger than his stature, and that refusal to fade became the seed of the legend he would grow into. There were nights when the uncertainty must have seemed too great, nights when no offer came, when injections loomed as impossible expenses, when the mirror showed him a body falling behind his age. But each of those nights ended the same way, with Messi clutching a ball, shaping new skills, refining his own unique style. That was his therapy. That was his calm. That was his answer. The world kept whispering, too small, but his play kept replying, watch. He did not match others in growth, but he surpassed them in touch, control, balance, and a focus that sharpened through the pain. He trained, he dreamed, he refused to yield. Against biology, against doubt, against money, against time, he stitched together a will strong enough to cross borders.
And then, slowly, a door cracked open. Not in Rosario, not in the clubs that turned away, but across an ocean. News traveled of a chance in Barcelona, of a trial in a place far from the streets he knew. For the boy carrying the weight of silent battles, it was not just a football offer, it was a lifeline. It was hope that the game he had bound himself to might return that loyalty at last. Picture a boy standing at the edge of his hometown, his small bag held close, his mind heavy with both fear and hope. You can almost hear the sound of his family saying goodbye, the voices thick with pride but softened by sadness. The streets of Rosario had been his world, the cracked pavements, the night games under fading light, the support of his parents, and the teasing warmth of siblings and friends. Now those familiar sounds faded into the hum of an airport. At 13, the boy was leaving not for a short trip, but for a leap over the ocean, a journey that would change not just his life, but the way the game itself would be remembered. The plane ride was long, its hours stretched with flashes of thought. Imagine him pressing his forehead to the window, watching the clouds drift endlessly, the land below turning from one shade to another. For a child that young, time itself must have felt strange, pulling him further from the simple streets that gave him his voice and into the unknown rhythm of a different world. Barcelona was waiting, but at that time, it was little more than a name. A place filled with strangers, new voices, unfamiliar meals, and the strong hope of one thing: football. Every goodbye carried its own echo. For his mother, it may have been the silence in the kitchen that would follow. For his father, perhaps the long hours missing the sight of his son walking through the door after school. For Messi himself, it was the absence of the streets that had raised him, the voices of neighbors who knew him before he was a name anyone spoke with wonder. That ache of leaving did not vanish in flight. It followed him. And yet, just like every time doubt pressed him before, he held close to the ball, the one anchor that never left. When he arrived in Barcelona, he stepped into more than a city. He stepped into an entirely different rhythm of life. Imagine being a child in a place where the language feels like music you do not yet understand. The food arrives in flavors you cannot instantly name, and even the afternoons stretch differently in their pace. It was culture shock, layered onto longing, layered onto expectation. At night, he felt the pull of Rosario in his chest, and in the morning, the pressure doubled. The silent question of whether he would prove himself worthy of the chance given.
The trial in Barcelona became the silent turning point. The fears, the homesickness, the doubt, all could be silenced if only he carried himself on the pitch the same way he had on the streets of Rosario. And when the ball arrived at his feet, it was as though nothing else existed. Small though he was, his control was magnetic. He moved faster than defenders could read, sharper than keepers could react, softer in touch than eyes expected. The ball did not leave him. It flowed with him, almost as if tethered by something unseen. He was not just playing, he was speaking, letting the coaches know without a word that this was talent that could not be denied. But for Barcelona, the decision was not simple. Football clubs are made of dreams, yes, but also of politics, budgets, and risk. To accept Lionel into their structure meant more than giving a boy a jersey. It meant committing to his medical treatment, investing time and trust in a body everyone else questioned. For him, those weeks must have been a storm, every day waiting for an answer, each night wondering whether he would return to Rosario with only memories of a trip. It was the cold corporate face of football, one he would learn early, one that existed in stark contrast to the warmth of the game itself. And yet, the decision came. Barcelona would sign him, not at first with grandeur, but with a commitment written in the most unassuming way. Whether the contract was inked on napkins or in neat documents mattered less than the truth behind it. His dream lived on. That day, it was not the roar of stadiums that kept the fire alive, but the quiet scratch of pen on paper, the formal signal that he would stay and grow. It is a detail of his story that might seem small, but in that moment, the fate of football's course bent slightly towards greatness. For Messi, though, signing was only the beginning. Loneliness did not vanish with a contract. You can picture him in those early months at night, lying in a small room far from home, listening to the distant hum of a city he had not yet learned to call his own. The distance from family pressed deep. Even food tasted of strangeness. The streets were no longer cracked and narrow. Barcelona carried wide boulevards and architecture that seemed almost too grand, too foreign. In that vastness, he was still the shy, undersized child who loved football more than words. What began to change his world, beyond his own work, were the bonds formed with others around him in Barcelona. Older players, sensing his silence and shyness, reached out with warmth. Among them, his bond with Ronaldinho became something of a light. Ronaldinho would later embrace Messi as a younger brother, his arm around him when Messi crossed into the senior side. But even early on, that care was visible. A team is built not just on tactics, but on trust, and Messi was beginning to find both.
On the pitch during trials and training, you could see how the ball became an extension of himself. He did not need words to prove belonging. His feet spoke louder. In a city of stars, he did not come blazing with bravado. He came quietly, almost timidly, yet his control, balance, and soft radiance with the ball caught eyes quickly. Coaches, players, and staff would not have missed it. This was not just skill. This was a rare gift demanding space to grow. Still, as warm as acceptance was from teammates, there was always the shadow of expectation. Imagine being 13, surrounded by professionals in systems far larger than your world had ever been, knowing deep inside that failure would mean not simply disappointment, but an ending. This was no summer camp. This was survival in a new form. Behind every touch on the ball lingered responsibility, for his family's sacrifices, for the hope invested in him, for his own dream to remain alive. In a way, that pressure carved him further. It made each training sharper, each drill, each scrimmage, each moment beneath the watchful eyes of coaches became a chance not simply to learn, but to prove, again and again, that his size was not weakness, but uniqueness. Where others leaned on strength, he moved with balance. Where others forced space, he slipped like water through gaps. He became not only a boy with talent, but a player shaping a game-worthy style distinct from anyone else. Through it all, the loneliness remained. Shyness clung to him like a shadow, and nights were marked by longing for Rosario. The voices of his family, the warm meals, the familiar touch of streets, these existed only in memory. But each time he stepped on the field, those feelings transformed. His ball carried the weight of his home. Each dribble became not just a movement in training, but a whisper of his roots, a tribute to the cracked streets that made him. In that steadiness, he found balance between the ache of departure and the promise of future. It is here where his story tilts once more. The contract with Barcelona did not end the journey. It only opened a gate. Messi was not yet a star, not yet a name sung in stadiums, but he was planted firmly within La Masia, Barcelona's famed academy. Think of La Masia as a garden, where gifted seeds are placed in soil carefully tended through generations. It was not simply a destination, but fertile ground for growth, for discipline, for shaping boys into footballers. And now, within those walls, the boy from Rosario, so small in body but so vast in spirit, would quietly begin to grow. It was in La Masia's gentle halls that his gift would be nurtured, where those lonely nights would be balanced by structured days of training, where skills would refine and dreams would sharpen. The leap across the ocean was over, but the building of a legend was only beginning.
Imagine hallways where footsteps echo softly, walls lined with memories of the ones who came before. That is La Masia, Barcelona's academy, a place that feels both like a school and a home, yet carries the quiet weight of expectation. Each room has its own hum, laughter spilling from one, the sound of coaches calling out from another, the thud of a ball against the ground echoing faintly in the distance. For a boy like Messi, still so shy and still adjusting to the ache of being far from his family, these corridors were not only pathways between meals and training, they were the place where he slowly built the rhythm of his new life. La Masia has always been more than a building. It was designed to shape boys into men, and not just men, but players connected to Barcelona's philosophy. The academy nurtured not just skill with a ball, but also discipline, an understanding of movement, and a respect for the game's deeper layers. For Messi, it offered structure where his world had once felt uncertain. Regular meals, training, rest, everything timed, everything ordered. This order gave him something solid to hold on to, a still point during the restless experience of living in a culture so foreign to him. But even with the safety of structure, the reality of separation weighed heavily. Imagine lying in a small room at night, hearing only muffled voices a floor below, remembering the warmth of home in Rosario. He was soft-spoken by nature, and now distance and loneliness pressed harder. His shyness kept him close to silence, even when surrounded by other boys his age. Small details reminded him of what was missing. Familiar dishes were replaced by food that felt strange. Family voices were replaced by quick conversations with teammates he hardly knew. And still, tomorrow would always demand the discipline of training. Training itself became his comfort. Each drill carried repetition, the same patterns repeated until they grew sharp with precision. To someone else, these routines could feel relentless. For Messi, they became a relief, a space carved out where he didn't have to speak too much or explain himself. The ball once again spoke for him. Every weighted touch, every controlled turn was his language. Slowly, silently, the discipline of La Masia molded his natural ability into something sharper. It was not magic, not sudden brilliance, but the steady crafting of raw skill into refined technique. Step by step, you could see how his play began to sharpen. He moved through drills with balance, his body still slight, but his movements compact. Give him a small square of grass, and he could make it feel wide with possibilities. In the tightest spaces, where other players struggled to control the ball, he seemed to glide as though the ball and his feet were attached. Coaches noticed it. Teammates did too. His touches had a different sound, lighter but crisper, the kind of control that turned heads without even trying. Among teammates, there was friendly competition, but also a quiet awareness. They were all working toward the same dream, the senior shirt of Barcelona. Most of them were talented enough to imagine it. Yet when Messi played, there was a difference they couldn't quite put into words. The way he shielded the ball despite his size. The way he accelerated almost without warning. The way he seemed to see angles a second faster. It marked him as unusual. None of this made him loud or boastful. He stayed the same quiet boy, small in stature, but carrying the ball like it was drawn to him. Barcelona as a club, in turn, was not only shaping him, they were also being shaped by him. Their systems, Their ways of teaching the game were meeting a talent so specific that they adjusted in subtle ways. Coaches noticed what set him apart and encouraged it rather than sanding it down. He adapted to their philosophies, yes, but at the same time, they learned to leave space for the qualities they could not design. It was an exchange, a balance between institution and individual, that allowed his gift to unfold. Routine life at La Masia carried its own steady tone. Days broken down into meals, lessons, training, study, rest. The rhythm gave purpose, but it also reminded him that he was still far from home. The crowded dining hall filled with chatter, voices rising and falling like a tide. Messi often stayed quiet, finding comfort not in conversation, but in observing, in listening. On the training ground, his silence faded, replaced by motion. Here, on the pitch, he felt in tune again. The drills, the sprints, the short scrimmages, this was his way of belonging. Imagine the other boys watching him during small matches, when he carried the ball through them as if gravity held it in his control. For them, it was both inspiring and intimidating. Here was someone their age, yet playing with touches that seemed carved from a different source. He did not celebrate loudly after good plays. He did not boast, but he revealed something undeniable. That even in a hall filled with gifted players, some stood apart. Messi was that figure, though he carried it with humility. Year by year, his technique became more complete. Where earlier he relied mostly on instinct, now training had given him additional structure. His passing sharpened. His awareness grew. He learned when to release the ball, when to hold it, how to press, how to track back. The Academy's demand for tactical understanding started blending with his natural artistry, creating a player not only gifted, but disciplined. Coaches could see his potential maturing under careful hands.
And while the Academy focused on shaping players for Barcelona's system, Messi's own style seemed to shape itself within it. His ball control was precise, but not mechanical. His dribbles were direct, but filled with grace. He began to adapt fluidly into the positional play the club prized, yet every so often, he would break patterns with touches that surprised even his coaches. It was as if the structure of La Masia gave him a foundation, and from that solid ground, his individuality grew even brighter. Still, the shyness was always there. Off the field, he rarely sought attention. He carried himself almost like a shadow in the room, voicing little, observing much. This made his gift on the pitch all the more striking. The same boy who avoided the spotlight in daily life became the most luminous figure the moment a ball arrived at his feet. For his peers, it was almost a contrast too sharp to fully grasp, but it was part of the mystery. Off the pitch quiet, on the pitch impossible to ignore. The Academy created bonds as well, playing day by day beside the same boys, sharing dormitories, meals, joys and losses. The group created a sense of family. This camaraderie softened the loneliness. The games they played, not just the official matches, but also the scrimmages in spare moments, built connection. Messi, still shy, expressed himself through the play itself. Where words failed, his passes spoke for him. Where gestures lacked, a dribble became communication. It is important to remember that La Masia pressed players as much as it supported them. For some, the Academy was too much, a place where pressure thinned dreams instead of nurturing them. For Messi, that same pressure honed him. The needs of the system, discipline, technique, maturity, did not erase his artistry, but polished it. He grew accustomed to carrying weight silently. Each season built upon the last, marking progress not in loud announcements, but in quiet sharpness of play. Think of it like a craftsman sanding a rough piece of wood, each pass making the surface smoother, finer, more refined. That was Messi at La Masia. The corners of his talent, already astonishing, were rounded and strengthened by the Academy's methods. His size remained small, his frame still questioned by some, yet his game had grown tall, his abilities strikingly clear. By the time he approached his mid-teens within those walls, the boy from Rosario felt less out of place. His teammates respected him, his coaches trusted him, and his own self-belief, though quiet, flickered steadily. He was no longer the child hoping he would be chosen to stay. He had proven that he belonged. More than that, he had shown he was ready for more.
The gentle halls of La Masia had done their work. The shy boy found stability, his technique sharpened, his tactical understanding deepened. Barcelona had not simply kept him, they had begun to prepare him, without even realizing, for the moment when he would step out of the academy's sheltered halls and onto the bigger stage. That stage was not just any step. It was the senior side of Barcelona, the same team whose shirt he had dreamed of wearing, the same club that tested his path, that once questioned his size but eventually invested in his survival. The time was coming for him to place that shirt over his small frame, still shy, still quiet, but carrying inside him lessons gathered from the streets of Rosario and refined in the gentle corridors of La Masia. His journey was about to take its next stride, into senior football, where sparks would begin to fly. Imagine the moment a teenager first pulls the senior shirt across his small frame. The fabric sits a little loose on his shoulders, the badge feels heavier than usual, and the lights above seem brighter than ever before. At that age, walking out beside men who already carried global reputations, he was still only a boy. You could see the nerves in how calmly he adjusted his kit, how steady he tried to keep his face, even though inside he must have been holding 1,000 thoughts. Yet beneath that calm, there was also something else, a quiet determination, a familiar reminder to himself that once the ball touched his feet, everything else would disappear. His debut was not marked by grand speeches or fanfare. It unfolded gently, as if the world had not yet realized what was about to be revealed. The crowd, full of voices, did not know that one of the game's defining chapters was slowly opening in front of them. Messi entered the pitch as a teenager, unassuming, his frame still small among seasoned professionals. And yet, the moment the ball found him, a hush seemed to settle in the rhythm of the match. His touches carried no hesitation. His movements were quick, natural, and balanced, as though he had been playing at this level all his life. For him, the real question was not whether he loved the game or whether he had talent. Both were already clear. The tension now came from outside. Could this boy handle the weight of senior football, the speed, the pressure, the demands of fans? In that instant, every step, every touch, carried the eyes of thousands who were asking whether youth could stand among giants. The answer came not in words but in moments. Short dashes past defenders, sudden bursts of control, a sharp eye for teammates darting into space. It was never noisy. It was subtle, yet impossible to miss. Part of what allowed him to find comfort was the warmth shown by Ronaldinho. Already known across the world, Ronaldinho was a star whose smile and brilliance eased the weight for those around him. He watched Messi closely, saw in him something familiar, and chose not to overwhelm him with instructions. Instead, he offered gestures of faith, a supportive pass, a nod, a simple encouragement that told Messi he belonged here, even if doubt lingered in others. That mentorship, quiet but genuine, gave Messi the space to play without carrying the entire burden himself. In matches and training sessions, their link grew quickly. Ronaldinho's flair met Messi's precision, a combination that hinted at something beautiful to come. For fans watching, those moments where the two combined on the pitch felt like early sparks before a fire. Ronaldinho would glide into space, draw defenders, and then nudge the ball across to the teenager, who darted through with speed and confidence. In those few plays, Messi showed glimpses of what made him different. His acceleration was sudden but balanced, his control tight, and his vision sharper than expected for someone so young. Then came the first goals. A ball at his feet on the edge of a crowded box, a run across the line of defenders, a finish lifted with composure beyond what people expected. It was not just that he scored, it was the calm with which he did it, the absence of fear in such a pressured moment. He made it look as though it had always been part of him. Fans reacted instantly, their cheers rising high, sensing they were witnessing something rare. You could almost feel the crackle in the air, as if the stadium itself had noticed a shift taking place. His celebrations, however, told a different story. Where others might have run to the corner flag, roaring, arms wide, Messi's gestures were simple. A lift of his hands, a soft smile, a glance back toward teammates. He kept his joy contained, quiet, even though what he had done sent cheers across the stands. It was this contrast, the understated way he accepted his moments of brilliance, that drew fans closer. They felt his humility, the genuine spirit of a boy who played not for attention, but for the love of the ball. This honesty made his early flashes even more striking. With each chance he received, his confidence grew. He did not demand the ball, yet when it arrived, he treated it with the same delicacy as always, keeping it close, turning away from pressure, slipping through narrow gaps. Defenders larger and stronger found themselves following shadows, unable to react in time. His passes came quick, his finishes composed, and slowly he moved from being the boy on trial to being someone the team relied on in moments of attack. The transition was quiet, almost unnoticed at first, but it was steady. The more minutes he played, the more fans began to see consistency. These were not lucky runs. They were not mistakes by defenders. They were patterns, signs of a player whose control of momentum was already different from others. He didn't force goals. They seemed to arrive naturally through him. When he linked with teammates, space opened where moments earlier none had existed. When he ran toward goal, time appeared to slow in his favor. The momentum of the game bent gently around his steps, as though guided by his presence. Ronaldinho's role remained vital in this stage. He protected Messi from the weight of expectation, shouldering the attention himself, while quietly offering Messi the stage when the moment felt right. Fans adored Ronaldinho, and within that shelter, Messi found freedom to breathe. It was within these early seasons of guidance that Messi began learning how to express himself in senior football without collapsing under external pressure. He had room to play, but also a mentor to catch him if he faltered. That rare combination gave him space to grow without burning too quickly. The first real impact Messi made was not just seen in statistics or results, but in the way people spoke about him. After matches, the conversations changed. Supporters who had once asked, "Who is this small boy?" now whispered with excitement, "Have you seen him play?" The tone around him shifted rapidly. He was no longer just a youth prospect being tested. He had become the quiet surprise who turned heads with sudden bursts of brilliance. And though his voice remained shy, his play spoke in volumes that carried beyond the pitch. Those early flashes mattered more than many realized at the time. This was not yet the fully formed player who would dominate for years, but the seedling of that greatness, already strong enough to survive the pressure of senior football. His presence on the field, his control under bright lights, his ability to find calm in moments where others trembled. Those early sparks were proof that the struggles earlier in his life had not only prepared him for this, but had strengthened him. Imagine the stadium during one of those first goals. The ball slips beyond the keeper, it rattles softly into the net, and the entire crowd rises as one body. Yet amid the noise, Messi stands calm, nodding, turning back toward teammates quickly, almost shy of the spotlight. The crowd roars, but he remains quiet within it. That contrast carried an elegance of its own, and it spoke to the kind of player he would always be. Fierce brilliance on the pitch, soft humility off it. As weeks turned into months, he became more than a substitute or a hopeful youngster. He grew into an option, then a solution, then a weapon for his team. Opponents began to plan for him. Defenders studied him. Fans began circling matches not just for results, but to witness what new glimpse of wonder he might deliver. The spark had not yet become a firestorm, but its glow was undeniable. For the boy from Rosario, it was a first taste of destiny manifesting on the grandest stage. The club, too, began to see what they had on their hands. La Masia had polished him, but now the first team was shaping him into something even larger. Barcelona was no longer just the place where he trained. It had become his proving ground, the canvas for the artistry that had lived inside him all along. With each appearance, his claim strengthened. With each goal, the story built higher. The boy had carried doubts for years, carried whispers of being too small, too fragile, too uncertain. And now,
With the shirt of Barcelona draped across his shoulders, he was answering them in the most fitting language, football itself. The mini payoff of this stage sits clear. Messi was not just ready, he was destined. The doubts that had chased him through childhood suddenly felt misplaced. His talent, his calm, his quiet spirit, they all belonged on this senior stage. What began as a question ended quickly in clarity. This boy, small in frame but vast in will, was carrying a skill that would one day reshape the sport. And this was only the spark. Ahead waited more. Seasons where he would no longer be the quiet understudy, but the heartbeat of Barcelona. The path from shy teenager to the core of a golden era was about to unfold, each step layering his legend further. The climb from spark to steady flame had begun. Imagine the Camp Nou on a night when the stands are heavy with anticipation. Tens of thousands of people sit pressed together, the sky dark above, a faint breeze rolling across the city. From the tunnel steps a small figure in the familiar shirt, no longer the boy making cameos, but the player everyone watches for with expectation. You hear the rustle grow into a roar as Messi jogs onto the pitch. The stadium, vast as it is, seems to lean toward him as though it breathes with his movements. Each time the ball brushes his boots, a collective intake of air ripples across the tiers, waiting to see what follows.
By now, Messi had shifted from promise to centerpiece. Barcelona's golden years were beginning to unfold, and at the heart of it was the quiet boy from Rosario. He was no longer just a weapon for surprise, but the rhythm setter, dictating play in ways that made both teammates and opponents shape themselves around him. His dribble was not simply about speed, but about balance. He carried the ball as if attached by thread, turning defenders with quick movement, darting between spaces so tight it felt almost impossible. People compared it to a dance. Each step, each sway, was deliberate, and as he moved, others followed as though drawn into his orbit. The challenge, however, was relentless. Barcelona's rise put them against Europe's fiercest clubs year after year. Nights in the Champions League demanded more than glimpses of talent. They demanded consistency under pressure, the type of composure that sets apart stars from legends. And Messi answered, again and again. His impact was not limited to goals, though he scored many. It lay equally in creating, in assisting, in building moments from nothing. In games where the noise pressed heavy and defenders closed fast, he kept the calmest touch. His presence turned matches often decided by inches into contests tilted firmly in Barcelona's favor. Watch long enough, and you start to see a rhythm in his play. His goals themselves were often less a strike of force, more a brushstroke of patience. A soft curl to the far post, a low slide beneath a keeper diving too soon, a composed finish when everyone expected haste. These were not just goals. They were pieces of art stitched into the rapid pace of the game. Fans held them not merely as numbers, but as memories etched in sight and sound, the moment slowing as his foot met the ball, the net rippling silently before the noise exploded. One moment could be dribbling through tight defenders, his body leaning forward, his balance unbroken. The next, a sudden release to a teammate cutting through, his assist opening space where none appeared seconds before. That dual nature, scorer and creator, was what defined him in these years. Barcelona had power, skill, and flair across positions, but Messi was the one who stitched their threads together. Each game reminded supporters that the team's heartbeat was not found in loudness, but in a quiet genius guiding the flow. For Messi, though, such comparisons rarely shaped his demeanor. On the pitch, he stayed quiet, understated, focused wholly on the ball. Off the pitch, words were scarce, interviews measured, his humility always intact. He let the play paint the picture. And each match, each tournament, added strokes until the canvas grew undeniable. His artistry was not loud. It whispered in ways that could not be ignored. The Champions League became the truest test of his evolution. Facing Europe's best meant every mistake could end the dream. Every moment was magnified. And Messi delivered consistently. You may remember the way he slipped between defenders in a quarterfinal, turned with such speed that even the replay seemed slow. Or how he lifted a composed finish over a charging keeper in a semi. as if the ball itself had followed his calm rather than the chaos around him. These moments, repeated season after season, gave him the reputation of composure under pressure. Fans trusted that, when the lights were brightest, his touch would not falter. Barcelona's golden years grew not from one player alone, but from harmony. A midfield that held the ball with confidence, defenders who pressed high, wingers who stretched wide. Yet, at the very heart stood Messi. His influence ran deeper than statistics. He was the source they looked to in games when rhythm stuttered. He sparked counters, he pressed late, he created angles others could not see. The trust of teammates in him was clear. Balls flowed to his side naturally, as if pulled toward his feet, and equally, his trust in them gave Barcelona fluidity, rare in football. Fans inside the Camp Nou experienced something unique in those years. The way the stadium reacted to him was unlike any other. With other stars, applause followed moments. With Messi, silence often preceded them, a hush before anticipated brilliance. The stadium breathed with him, like an orchestra waiting for the smallest movement of the conductor's hand. When he cut inside his man, the rising pitch of the crowd mirrored the tempo of his stride. When he drew back his foot, time appeared to slow. And when the net bulged, celebration cascaded like a wave. Over these seasons, people stopped asking whether he could handle the weight of Barcelona's demands. Instead, the measure shifted, whether Barcelona could remain the same without him in the center. He was no longer the young sparkle or the promising star. He became their pulse, their central point, their heartbeat. Everything ran through him, not by force, but by natural flow. His style was not built on noise, but on quiet control, and in that stillness, he carved his greatness.
The remarkable part was his humility. Surrounded by trophies, applauded by crowds across continents, the boy from Rosario never lost his quiet nature. Post-match, his words rarely extended past gratitude, speaking first of team rather than self. His joy was visible when teammates scored, his arm often raised to celebrate their success. That gentleness set him apart as much as his skill. You could see his greatness without hearing him announce it. It lived in his play. Even his rivals admitted the beauty in what he did. For years, Europe threw its strongest defenders at him, its most physical midfielders, its boldest schemes. He kept finding ways. His dribbles adapted, his passing sharpened, his finishing evolved. If opponents marked him tighter, he released quicker. If they pressed higher, he darted into space. The answers came naturally, showing that his gift was not only instinct but growth. He learned fast, he adjusted, and still his artistry remained untouched. At this stage, consistency was his greatest trait. Talent can shine briefly, but to shape years of dominance requires persistence, and that was what Messi offered. Each season built upon the last, a steady glow of performances rarely interrupted. Titles followed, not by chance but by design, by the constant of his presence. His teammates thrived around him. Fans knew each match could bring another memory, another composed finish, another burst of dribbling impossible to explain, yet impossible to miss. If you close your eyes, you can picture one of those nights at the Camp Nou. The lights high above, the sea of shirts around you, the grass shining under the flood lamps. The ball rolls to Messi. The defenders angle themselves. The crowd leans forward. He feints left, drifts right, slips inside with such control that it feels less like evasion and more like choreography. He shoots, a composed finish guided into the corner, and the noise erupts. That cycle, repeated again and again, became the rhythm of Barcelona's golden era. In those years, Messi turned from promise into undeniability. He grew from being one of many bright stars to the anchor of the system. His artistry transformed not just matches, but the atmosphere in which they unfolded. He was no longer playing to be accepted. He was the one defining acceptance itself. With grace, control, humility, and relentless consistency, he became the heart of one of the greatest sides football has seen. But even as Barcelona crowned him their heartbeat, another stage called for him with heavier burden. The shirt of his nation bore a different weight, one not cushioned by club harmony or constant support, but carried by history and expectation. The battles abroad with Argentina would test him not on skill alone, but on resilience deep enough to survive heartbreak. That next chapter, where he must carry not just a club, but a country, lay waiting just beyond.
Picture the moment a player pulls on the shirt of his country, the white and blue stripes pressing against his chest. It looks the same as the jersey worn by countless others before him, but to Messi, it weighed more heavily than any club kit he had ever worn. It was not just cloth. It was the pulse of millions of people, each one whispering the same demand. Bring joy back to us. Bring trophies home. For many, this shirt symbolized history itself, passed through generations, carried by dreams too large for one man alone. But for Messi, there was no escape. He had to carry it, whether or not the world knew how much it asked of him. When he stepped onto pitches with Argentina, he was not the same figure who moved with such ease at the Camp Nou. At Barcelona, the rhythm of play wrapped around him. Teammates understood his timing, the club's culture nurtured his flow, and success arrived in abundance. But for Argentina, the context shifted. Here, the spotlight was harsher, the scrutiny louder, and the criticism quicker. Each touch of the ball was judged not only for what it created, but for what it failed to produce in the eyes of expectant fans. Every missed chance, every lost final, draped a heavier weight across his shoulders. The first sting that defined this contrast was the final in Brazil. Argentina pressed, fought, and nearly seized their chance, but one clinical strike in extra time ended everything. The whistle blew, and Messi stood among his teammates as the winners celebrated on the other side. Silver medals draped his neck, but they felt closer to chains. You could see it in his eyes, the emptiness of coming so close, only to leave without the dream fulfilled. For a player who had collected countless trophies with Barcelona, this absence struck deeper than any club loss. At the Copa America, the pattern repeated cruelly. In 1 year, Argentina fought to the final only to collapse at the final hurdle. Another year passed, and again, they endured heartbreak against familiar opponents. Final whistles arrived like echoes of the same nightmare. Messi, who had poured himself into every run, every pass, every dribble, fell to his knees in tears more than once. Cameras captured his face, pale with devastation. To millions watching, it was an image that seemed impossible. Messi, the GOAT in club football, trapped in cycles of national defeat. The criticism grew louder. Argentine media, often merciless, pointed fingers at him. Voices questioned his leadership, his spirit, even his identity. Was he truly one of them? Did he care enough? The sharpness of these questions cut deep, not because of the words alone, but because they came from his own people. No matter how many trophies he lifted in club football, the whispers followed him whenever he wore the white and blue. And each failure, whether by inches on goal or missed penalties, seemed to confirm the doubts in the loudest corners. For Messi, the difference between club and country was felt deep in his bones. At Barcelona, joy overflowed from every touch, supported by a system built around him. With Argentina, joy clashed constantly against pressure, expectation, and history. Here, fans did not only want to be entertained, they needed redemption for decades of near misses, a return to the glory once written by legends past. Messi carried that history, even though he never asked to. Every run on the international stage was shadowed by comparisons. Every silence after defeat grew heavier with the weight of a nation. Imagine losing once, twice, 3 times, each time in the harshest spotlight, each time with millions watching expectantly. Some players never reach such finals in their lives. Messi had reached them, but left with nothing tangible. The heartbreak was not quiet. It echoed across stadium seats, across television screens, into the streets of Buenos Aires and Rosario. Tears were not his alone. They belonged to the fans who saw their hero broken, and yet could not bring themselves to offer him peace. For them, his greatness abroad was never enough, not when the national team remained without its crown. After repeated losses, the strain nearly broke him. He once walked away, announcing an end to his journey with Argentina. The decision came with the exhaustion of too many finals lost, too many dreams snapped in cruel endings. You could imagine the silence on that day. Fans who had questioned him suddenly grasped the depth of what his absence meant. The outcry turned from criticism to desperation, and the pleas filled the air for him to return. In that moment, the tension of his national story revealed itself. His relationship with Argentina was never one of detachment. It was love, deep but scarred, tested again and again by fate and expectation. And despite the wounds, he returned. That choice defined him. Where others would have let the criticism win, Messi came back, determined to try again, to give himself once more for a team and a people who sometimes seemed unable to love him fully. It was the clearest sign of his resilience, the quiet core of his greatness, not in goals scored or trophies won, but in his refusal to walk away from the hardest journey of his career. His persistence became a story of its own, a reminder that true greatness is not only about conquering at the first try, but enduring through heartbreak after heartbreak. Each return to the pitch for Argentina brought with it the ghosts of those finals. Yet Messi still carried the shirt, still pressed forward when easier choices lay waiting. He silenced his doubts with effort. He silenced his critics with resilience. And though he did not yet bring home the prize fans demanded, his determination began to redefine the narrative. People started to see that greatness lay as much in his ability to keep giving, even when drenched in heartbreak, as it did in his trophies at Barcelona.
The contrast between his two worlds remained striking. In one, he was surrounded by a system built to amplify him, the club treating him as its axis. In the other, he bore the weight of blending into a team sometimes fractured, always pressed by outside noise, and carrying the entirety of history on his back. For many, it explained why his international form didn't match his club brilliance. For Messi, it explained nothing but perseverance. To stop would have been simple. To continue required a strength even deeper than his skill. His story with Argentina, up to those moments of despair, revealed as much about his character as his dazzling runs. The GOAT many adored abroad was also the boy from Rosario who would not quit on the shirt of his nation, even when it broke his heart. His greatness grew larger than goals and assists. It stretched into resilience, the stubbornness to return when leaving seemed easier. That was his silent triumph, at least for now. And so the arc of his career twisted between soaring glories in Barcelona and aching heartbreak in Argentina. The white and blue jersey remained a weight he could not give up, not because it always brought joy, but because it was part of who he was. Those finals lost, those medals that stung, those tears that fell, they all became chapters of a greater tale. They showed that Messi's path to true greatness would not be smooth. It would be jagged, lined with setbacks, demanding patience and courage beyond anyone's expectation. Every time he returned, every time he dragged himself back from the edge of despair, fans watched and slowly realized that this persistence was itself a gift. He was more than goals. He was more than dribbles. He was a lesson in staying, in refusing to give in, even when success refused to arrive. And in that lesson, greatness revealed itself not only in the highlight reels, but in the quiet refusal to let heartbreak finish the story. All of this built towards something larger. Through every near miss, every sharp criticism, and every tear, the stage was preparing for the arc of redemption. The path would not end in sadness. Though the heartbreak had lasted for years, though every whisper of doubt seemed louder than support, Messi's story with Argentina was not over. It was gathering tension for the moment when the boy who once felt too small, too doubted, too fragile, would finally lift the prize that had eluded him almost his whole life. That is where the journey presses next, to the stage of his final chance, to the World Cup in Qatar, where Messi would not only play for victory, but for peace with his nation, his critics, and himself. The redemption arc waited quietly on the horizon.
Imagine the moment slowing. A single man standing on the pitch, the air around him charged with noise too vast to take in. His head is tilted slightly upward, the weight of years pressing against him, and in his hands rests the dream that had carried him since he was a child in Rosario. This was Lionel Messi in Qatar in 2022, reaching out for the one prize that had danced out of his grasp again and again. The white and blue of his shirt seemed brighter under the stadium lights, and for a moment the miles of struggle faded into stillness. The World Cup rested within reach, the circle of his career finally closing. Argentina began this journey with weight pressing on every step. Everyone knew it was likely Messi's last chance to chase this crown, and the thought made each match loom heavier than it might have for anyone else. The country carried his story inside theirs, and the eyes of the sport fixed on each touch, each breath. There were games where the pressure felt suffocating, where one slip could have ended the dream before it had even begun. Yet each time expectations swelled, Messi met it not with noise or panic, but with the same quiet rhythm that had defined his life: calm, precise, steady. The first round startled the supporters, a defeat that threw shadows across the plan and stirred whispers of collapse. For many, it felt as though the story could end too soon, cut short just as the final chapter was meant to open. Yet from that stumble came something fierce. Argentina rallied, players grew closer, and Messi set the pace with his presence. His goal in one of the matches felt less about scoring and more about settling nerves. He sent the ball calmly into the net, a composed finish, the kind of strike that steadies a team rather than inflates it. His reaction was gentle, no wild celebration, only focus, as if to remind his teammates that the tournament was still theirs to claim. As the journey moved forward, tension grew with every opponent. In one match, his pass sliced through the line with a clarity that only he seemed to see. The ball curled into space for his teammate, who finished and turned the match in Argentina's favor. You can almost picture Messi's small smile after the assist, his focus already returning to the next play. He became less a man chasing his own glory and more a figure shaping those around him, lifting them through his vision and calm authority. There were games that teetered on the edge of collapse, moments of drama when penalties were all that held the outcome together. Each shootout carried its own silence, the ball placed on the spot, the crowd unable to breathe. And Messi, slight frame under the glare of the stadium lights, stepped forward with composure. His strikes rolled past keepers with calm precision, restoring belief each time the air grew too thin. His calm bled into his teammates, reminding them, if he could face this weight and move quietly through it, so could they. The semifinal carried its own beauty, Messi guiding his side with a performance that leaned more on control than chaos. He moved not in flares of brilliance, but in steady decisions that never allowed nerves to take hold. His dribbles were tight, his passes crisp, his leadership steady. Watching him then was like watching a conductor hold an orchestra through a storm. Every flick of his boot, every pause of his touch, brought order to a match that could have slipped into panic. By the final whistle, Argentina was through, and whispers spread that perhaps, at last, fate had aligned with Messi. And so came the final, the biggest stage of them all. Argentina versus France, a clash loaded with speed, skill, and tension so thick that each second seemed to throb against the clock. From the start, Messi anchored his team, guiding them into rhythm. His penalty in the opening part of the match was struck with the calm of a man who had prepared for this moment all his life. The net rippled, and the noise of fans erupted, but his reaction once again was measured. Not triumphant, but composed, a steady leader urging those beside him to remain focused. Yet football rarely moves in straight lines. France surged back, moments of chaos tearing into Argentina's lead. Goals came suddenly, cracks widening across a match that had seemed steady. The atmosphere shifted into chaos, fans shouting, players gasping, eyes wide with disbelief as the scoreline twisted. In those flashes, Messi's presence became even clearer. His touches slowed the pace, his vision pulled his team back from the brink. When the ball fell to him in the box, he nudged it home, a scrappy but vital strike, reminding Argentina that the dream was still alive, even as the match spun out of control. The game refused to end quietly. France equalized again, and time bled into extra minutes. Each run felt desperate, each save electric. And yet, in the heart of that storm, Messi never lost his calm. He gestured to teammates, he shaped play. He kept Argentina from unraveling under pressure. When penalties returned as the final decider, the world seemed to pause. A final built on chaos would end on the stillness of a ball on a spot. Messi stepped forward first, shoulders relaxed, head steady. The run-up was smooth. The strike rolled past the keeper with calculated ease. No wild swing of the boot, just placement, control, belief. The crowd roared, but what lingered was the picture of his face. Focused, steady, a man carrying not just his own dream, but an entire nation's breathing hope. One by one, Argentina's penalties went in, each strike bringing them closer to the crown. And then, finally, the last shot crossed the line. The net flickered. The whistle blew. Imagine the noise. Players crumpled to the grass, fans wept, hands lifted to the sky, and at the center, Messi dropped to his knees, his emotions no longer contained. Around him, teammates piled together. The Argentinian crowd erupted in a chorus years in the making. In his hands, soon after, rested the World Cup trophy, gleaming gold under the lights. He lifted it high, a sight that blurred the boundary between dream and reality. For a player who had walked away in tears after so many lost finals, to now stand with the prize resting in his hands, was the clearest image of a circle completed. The world saw it not just as another title. It was closure. The boy once told he was too small, the teenager carrying doubt across the ocean, the man criticized at home for years of heartbreak. He now stood holding the trophy that silenced all doubt. The World Cup became more than a victory. It became the proof that persistence, humility, and resilience can bend fate. The reactions stretched around the globe. In streets across Argentina, celebrations spilled into every corner, fans crying, dancing, lifting flags until dawn. For them, this was not simply sport, but healing. For Messi, it was a release unlike anything else. A release from years of carrying a weight few could ever name, now lifted by triumph. The photos of him smiling with the trophy, arms draped by teammates, carried the warmth of a truth that needed no caption. Greatness had found its final crown. This was not the beginning, but the end of a pursuit that had lasted a lifetime. Each heartbreak that came before now made sense, because it led to this moment. Each criticism dissolved, each doubt faded, replaced by a scene fixed in sports history forever. Messi lifting the trophy in Qatar will stand as one of football's eternal images, the kind that outlives decades, passed down like folklore. It wasn't just Argentina's victory, it was his, the small boy from Rosario, now crowned before the world. And as the noise began to fade, a new tone took its place. The debates that once lingered, the arguments of eras and rivals, all began to soften. His triumph demanded reflection. What did it mean now that the circle was complete, that the boy who played on cracked streets, who grew under doubt, who rose in Barcelona's light and carried Argentina's weight, had finally lifted the ultimate prize? That calm question would give shape to the final part of his story, his place in history, and how those whispers of GOAT now drifted into one unified voice.
Picture the sound of whispers at first, scattered and unsure. One person in the crowd leans to another after a match. Another voice joins from a cafe corner, until slowly, those whispers gather into a single word, calm and unshaken. GOAT. The word, once weighty with debates and endless arguments, no longer trembled in uncertainty. Instead, it floated gently, accepted from fans, rivals, and legends alike. It arrived as though the world, after years of searching, had finally chosen agreement. For years, the story of greatness swirled with conflict. Football has always carried memory across eras. Supporters compared flair against power, artistry against goals, trophies against talent. To name one player the greatest,
meant to overlook countless others who had left the game richer. The debates reached every corner, from schoolyards where friends traded opinions to press tables where pundits parsed legacies piece by piece, never reaching peace. Messi's name always sat within those conversations, weighed for brilliance, but often questioned for what seemed missing. That ultimate prize that escaped him on the international stage. The World Cup changed all of that. When Messi lifted the golden crown in Qatar, something in the air seemed to quiet. Those arguments that had cycled for years met the one piece they had waited for. The missing fragment of evidence that fans had always used to temper his claim. With that trophy in his hands, the scale balanced, then shifted. People no longer spoke of what lacked. They spoke of the journey complete. In that moment, his record no longer needed explanation. No caveat stood in the way. Imagine the way that shift sounded. Before, debates always began with comparisons, pointing to different traits. Who was faster? Who scored more? Who carried different burdens? After Qatar, talk slowed into reflection instead. Legends of past eras, whose voices carried authority, offered respect rather than resistance. Rivals who once pushed against him now admitted his mastery, his place at the very summit. Fans who argued fiercely 1 year earlier began agreeing, some with surprise, others with relief. The conversation had altered. The outcome was not rivalry anymore, but consensus. The beauty of Messi's case did not lie only in trophies. If you list them, it becomes a mountain too steep to climb. But what made him the GOAT in the eyes of many was the way the mountain was climbed. His artistry was stitched through the years, dribbles that bent defenders with a soft tilt of the shoulder, passes that sliced fields open with a single glance, finishes that rolled into nets with composed calm. These moments turned into countless highlights, yet never relied only on show. His art was deliberate, refined, always in service of the game itself. Watching him was not to watch a player chasing records, but an artist chasing perfection each time he touched the ball.
And there was more. Greatness alone does not always win people. Humility does. Through peaks and heartbreak, Messi never let arrogance overshadow his story. Interviews stayed modest, celebrations remained subdued, even his brightest triumphs carried a quiet tone. Supporters recognized this gentleness as part of his greatness. You could admire his artistry, and admire also that he never demanded your admiration himself. He let the ball make his case. He lived almost as though conscious of his place, not in noise but in silence filled with action. That humility, carried across decades, softened countless opinions once hardened against him. His perseverance played just as firm a role. Many players shine brightest when all flows easily, when the team lifts them. Messi revealed his strength in the hardest chapters, final after final lost with Argentina, tears drying while criticism thundered above him. He walked away once, so broken that even fans thought the story had ended. And yet, he returned, lifting himself despite repeated heartbreak. To keep pushing when all seemed fractured, this defined him as much as goals ever did. That resilience lodged itself in memory. Supporters understood that to persist through such bruising heartbreak was to reveal greatness of character as well as of play. So the case built steadily. Artistry, humility, perseverance. As years stretched, his ability never dimmed. Even when age bent his legs and time slowed his pace, he found ways to adapt. Fewer sprints maybe, but more decisive touches. Less raw acceleration, but sharper vision. A career that evolved, yet never faded. This constancy, this refusal to float downward even as seasons passed, gave weight to his story. He was not simply a comet burning bright and vanishing. He was the steady glow, rising each season anew. When the World Cup victory arrived, it felt less like a surprise and more like closure, as though the universe had delayed his recognition so that, when it finally came, the story would appear whole. You could feel the shift in public tone immediately. Writers who once hedged their sentences now spoke directly. Rivals who had shared the stage no longer resisted his case. Fans who argued in endless cycles laid down their debates to celebrate together. It was no longer about opinion. It was about seeing the final piece fit into a puzzle already complete. Picture the contrast of atmosphere before and after that night in Qatar. For years, Messi's greatness provoked tension in debates, the swirling noise of comparisons that never resolved. After, the noise softened, replaced by calm acceptance. The word shifted from argument to agreement. GOAT. It no longer sparked dispute but affirmed recognition. It rang, not loud like a chant, but firm like a truth. And across the world, in stadiums, in homes, in voices old and young, that truth settled. A boy once told he was too small had become the measure by which
This consensus did not erase other legends. It did not diminish past eras or rival brilliance. Instead, it acknowledged Messi as the landmark against which all legacies would now be weighed. Debates did not end because others lost their place in history. They ended because his place had been secured beyond question. Artistry, humility, perseverance, crowned by the final triumph. This arc told a story rare enough to silence doubt. And so you find calmness in this conclusion. It is rare in sport, where opinions spin endlessly and loyalties divide. But here, the calm remains. Messi had no need to prove further. He was not GOAT because of one match in Qatar or one season in Barcelona. He was GOAT because his journey combined every piece: dreams from small streets, battles with his own body, leaps across oceans, tenderness within discipline, artistry shaped over decades, heartbreak carried in silence, resilience crowned in triumph. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the word drift across borders. In South America, spoken with joy on crowded streets. In Europe, admitted with admiration even by former rivals. In Asia, Africa, across North America, whispered and shouted in equal measure. The word is steady now. GOAT. And with it lives not only the memory of goals scored, but the memory of a story that stretched across generations. So when the debates of sport arise again, as they always will, Messi's name no longer floats uncertain. It rests anchored, secure. Whatever names join the discussion, whatever voices speak with passion, the consensus already holds steady. He is the measure of greatness, the standard carved not in noise but in quiet persistence, not in arrogance but in humility, not only in trophies, but in how he bore the weight of them. The circle closed with that final crown, but the glow of his story continues beyond. From this stillness comes reflection. Messi's journey cannot be measured solely by medals stacked in cabinets or numbers etched on charts. It is measured in the way the game itself bent closer to him, the way defenders chased shadows, the way the ball seemed bound to him by unseen thread. It is measured in the way fans argued for years, then offered silence in agreement. It is measured in how he played as though speaking a language beyond words, a language every supporter felt, but could not describe. Now, when the story turns to legacy, Messi's chapter will not be one among many. It will be the gentle guide, the calm measure, the glowing reminder that the greatest greatness comes not in spectacle alone, but in the patience of persistence, the artistry of play, the humility of spirit. The world, after so long, has agreed. And now, the question of where he stands is replaced by something even deeper. What his story tells us about what greatness truly means. That is where the journey leads next, into legacy, into reflection, into the quiet truth of how football's gentlest giant has left the game with more than trophies, more than goals, but a lesson stitched into his very name. Imagine a career stitched together not by noise but by quiet persistence. Messi's legacy is more than goals and medals. It is the steady rhythm of patience, resilience, and humility carried across decades. You see it in how he answered doubt with play, in how he treated triumph with calm, and in how he carried defeats without surrender. His story shows that greatness grows strongest in silence, in persistence that never bends. So take his journey as more than football. It is a lesson in how gentleness can outlast storms. If this helped you unwind, come back for another slow story.